You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin and Tony is with me and we're here to discuss all of the service news from January 21st through the 27th. We have a very small amount of news, but we do have a big discussion when it comes to Netflix later in the episode, so let's dive into the news topics first. First up, Disney Plus has announced their European launch date has moved up, and it is now, they also have stated the pricing for the service, so it will cost exactly £5.99 or €6.99, which translates to about $8 per month, or it will cost £59.99 or €69.99 for an annual subscription. The service will be available on March 24th, which is moves forward by 1 week because it was previously announced it was going to launch on March 31st. They will be available in the UK, Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Austria, and Switzerland. Additional Western European markets, including Belgium, the Nordics, and Portugal, will follow later in the summer. So not all of Europe, but that is basically the news. I mean, there's not a whole lot here other than it's moved up a week. So if you're a listener, if you're one of our listeners who's looking for Disney Plus, it is coming to March 24th, just less than 2 months away.
So all you guys can be able to watch The Mandalorian and just experience its awesomeness as we have in the States.
All right, next up, we talked about just a couple episodes ago about Netflix setting up a film office in France, specifically in Paris. Well, now they've set up an Italian film office in Rome, and this is going to help them work with the local market in creating projects specifically for the Italian, or based in Italy and things like that. So that is not a whole lot of news. I'm just going to move right along. The Annie Awards, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Annie Awards are, they're basically a celebration of animation, whether it be in film or television. There's a number of awards. This was the 47th annual Annie Awards that were just held, and Netflix ended up walking away with a large amount of awards. The big movie that walked away with the top title, Best Animated Feature, was Claws, which I previously have seen, and it was actually pretty good. What makes a difference specifically for this is that the Annie Awards, when it comes to animated features, generally the one that walks away with Best Animated Feature tends to be the same film that will walk away with Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. It doesn't always go that way, but most of the time that is the direction it heads because it's a lot of the same industry people who are, selecting these winners. So the idea is that Netflix could walk away with the Best Animated Feature for the year, and might I add, that's in a year where we had Toy Story 4, Frozen 2. It's interesting that when Disney has as big of a year as they had in 2019 with the amount of box office money that they pulled in, there can still be somebody out there who can usurp Disney for what they're best known for, which is animation.
This is great for Netflix because as we have known, they've had a bigger push into the animation market, and seeing a lot of their projects get acclaimed among the industry experts is great for them. Is extra validity. Yes, like it's Netflix is a lot of people, so they're gonna get a lot of volume in terms of like people watching their content. But it's also good to recognize, okay, like although you have quantity, like you also have quality, and your product is being recognized by others for its achievements. So that's great for Netflix and kind of validate that new business area, because we've seen them really put a lot of resources into the animation side. And one for adult animation, that's still a thing. Like BoJack Horseman is still kicking around. South Park is still great. Simpsons is still on for some reason all these years. Like there is an audience for adult animation, and that's great. But you can really see Netflix is okay. Like we need to dive down one into international, but then two into the kids streams. And animation is really big in the kids world. And so seeing them have such success is, I think, great for Netflix for them in their future. And it kind of puts like Disney, DreamWorks, all those people on notice and be like, hey, we're here.
And I'm looking through the article that was on Deadline, and it says out of the last 18 winners of the Annie's top animated prize, they went on to claim the Oscar Gold. So it's definitely a high probability that getting this award leads you to walk away with the award at the Oscar. Pretty high numbers. The other one that I guess is probably surprising to a lot of people, not only is Frozen 2 not part of, was not even nominated for a lot of these awards, but Toy Story 4 ended up walking away with absolutely nothing, and that was always one of the top tier animated franchises that would always almost guarantee to walk away with awards in general. So you can see that there's certain things that are shifting. Not to say that Disney is putting out horrible product. I'm not saying that. Obviously, Disney is still making products that are making money, and there's no question about that. It's more of a question of where is the quality of where's quality content currently being produced in the sense of these awards. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Netflix is where all quality will end up from, going forward, but it is definitely a shift, because you can see that the industry as a whole is very, very widely shifting in a lot of different degrees, and these awards are just one of them. And honestly, if Netflix walks away with more awards out of the Oscars than any other studio, I think it's going to be like basically the biggest shift that we could see, because then it shows that Netflix is at least doing something right in the eyes of the industry. All right, and if we didn't talk about Netflix enough already, we do have our main discussion for the point, which I know it's earlier in the episode, but let's be honest, it's the dead of winter, and there's not a ton of news. There's not even a lot of content news up to this point for this coming week. But that being said, there is a discussion we want to talk about. So the first thing is first, Netflix had their quarterly earning, and they released their quarterly report, and they announced that first off, they added 8.8 million global subscribers in quarter 4. That is higher than last quarter, which was 8.76, and it was also higher than expectations that Wall Street had set. While they did add more subscribers, the bulk of the subscribers were actually from outside of the US. The US subscribers that they added were actually down from the estimates. So it, again, as everything we've said for months, the international market is where Netflix has to go in order to continue their success. And they are doing that. There's no question about that. Every time we have an episode, whether it be an episode of service news or content news, we're always talking about stuff internationally and Netflix in the same sentence. It keeps happening because this is where Netflix can continue to succeed. And they have a significant lead over their competitors, where it's going to take some time for these other ones to really get into that international market. And not only will it take time, but as we know, time is a commodity that no one can buy. Netflix is got 160 million subscribers worldwide. Disney will launch in Europe, but Disney is still nowhere near the size of Netflix as far as their streaming service. Disney Plus, that is. Disney Plus is nowhere near the size as Netflix is as far as streaming goes. You have Prime Video, which is ramping up projects in different international markets, has the ability to, get out there and get more projects going. But when you look at some of the newcomers like Disney Plus or HBO Max, or even Apple TV, plus these other players that are coming, it's going to be a slow build to really get content for these other markets. While Apple TV launched internationally out the gate, their subscriber counts are nowhere near in the content that they have. The amount of content that they have is nowhere near as powerful as Netflix. So it's definitely something Netflix has to grab onto and run with for as long as they can, because eventually these other streaming services will have more money to start making more international projects, and when that starts happening, there's going to be more competition. So if they can get out the gate and get those subscribers locked in before the competitors start, getting into the markets and producing content within those markets, it's crucial for Netflix to be successful for the future. So that's the subscriber numbers. There's something else I want to talk about in a second, but do you have any comments about their growth?
I think we should just keep a soundbite of me saying that I was right about Netflix's international growth, just on the ready, just because I feel like once again it's appropriate. I think it's great that they've beat expectations again, but it doesn't surprise me that international is their focus. And I think this is not it's obviously this is newsworthy. I think it's good that companies are doing well and they are getting subscribers. But in terms of like, it's not doom and gloom for Netflix, but it's also not like, it's not like, Netflix is super like killing the competition, everyone else is dust. It's like, nope, Netflix is kind of doing their own thing. And it seems that the general audience and market has realized that, yes, although you do have these new entry players and the competition is heating up some, there's still, a healthy, product. They're a good company. People are still interested in the Netflix brand, even though like a lot of the Disney, Marvel, Star Wars titles have gone to like, Disney Plus, HBO is gearing up for their thing. Peacock is doing their thing and stuff like that. So from that aspect, it's not, I just don't want people to go too over the top of like, oh wow, Netflix is like killing everyone. It's like, well, no, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And it just confirms that Netflix is a brand besides, like Netflix has a brand. It's not the backlog content that they used to have or used to binge. Like, I think we can say that like now that like Netflix is a studio that has a brand. And I think that we can see, that stuff pretty evidently. So from the subscriber numbers, I'm not shocked. I think it's good, not like great, but I'm happy for them. It's good to see that Netflix is still, doing their thing. But once again, to me, that's not really like that big of crazy news. Like, yes, we are talking about the news and it's important, but it's not like earth shattering. To me, what is earth shattering? And I know that I'm kind of like stealing your next point is this new metric that Netflix has to rate their, viewership. So what is that about?
So one of the things as part of their quarterly earnings report that they release is that they're changing their metrics. So if you're unfamiliar with how, we've talked about this before, about how Netflix is overly secretive about the amount of people who actually watch their content. And we've talked about how there's show runners who don't even know how many people are watching their show at any given times to know whether or not it's successful or not successful. We've heard lots of stories about that, and we've discussed some of those. But one of the metrics that they publicly talk about generally come out when the quarterly earnings come out. And basically what it is they come out to say, hey, we had these shows and they were super successful, and we have X amount of viewers, and this show was super successful. And that's generally the only time we ever hear about any of the shows on Netflix, other than them being canceled. And you could just assume that the viewing wasn't there, and that's why it was canceled. But generally, the quarterly earnings reports, you always hear about their top tier shows, and you hear about how many millions of subscribers have watched the show. So previously, their metrics were that you had to watch at least 70% of either the single episode or of the project, whether it be a short or a documentary or a film. You'd have to watch 70% in order to count as a view. So previously, you'd have these, huge numbers for things. Last year, they touted Triple Frontier as one of their Netflix original films that had like 50 million subscribers watched it in the first 4 weeks. They touted Stranger Things, saying it was, they had the most viewer, all these viewers, millions and millions and millions of viewers, and they give specific numbers. However, they've decided that now they are going to change their metric. Instead of having to watch either 70% of the episode or 70% of the film, you will now have to, your view will now count if you only watch 2 minutes of the show or movie. And there's a problem with this, and I'll get to the problem in a second, but to be more clear, just to give you some comparisons on this. So Netflix, they touted a bunch of different shows that released in the last half of 2019. Specifically, they talked about The Witcher, and they said it released to 76 million members in the first 4 weeks, and then it said that You was watched by 54 million households, and they specifically give these numbers. Now, another show that came out was The Crown, and it said that 21 million households watched the third season of The Crown. That's up 40% from season 2, and there's a big difference. Also, Six Underground, which was the Ryan Reynolds film that came out in December, was watched by 83 million households. I'm not going to sit here and try to discount the fact that a lot of people are watching this content, because there is. But they're trying to claim that the idea of the intent of watching a show compared to the actual completion of a show is somehow has some sort of direct correlation, in the sense of 2 minutes isn't even as much as most trailers. And while the trailers won't count, the show itself, if you only watch the first 2 minutes, you might not even get to the opening credits. How can you honestly count that as a intentional view and say that that view counts?
I think everyone can realize that you obviously do not like this new metric. Spoilers, I do not like this new metric. But before we go into that, I know a lot more like tech stuff. That's where I spend a lot more time in. I don't focus that much on like the TV and movies in terms of like the history of viewership numbers and, linear programming and stuff like that. Like you definitely know a lot more about that. I just show up and watch stuff. You know what I mean? So a common way to get metrics right in the old way of thinking is have these Nielsen numbers. So how would, if we're comparing with the new versus the old, right? So Netflix's viewership, right? 70%, of the title. Okay. That kind of makes sense. 2 minutes of it doesn't make any sense, but to kind of go back to some ground truth, how does Nielsen rate, TV shows and movie engagement in those numbers? Because I feel like if we're going to start attacking something new, we need to kind of understand where we came from. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the gist of my understanding with the Nielsen, and I'm not going to try to claim that I'm some sort of expert because I'm not, but there's a variety of different types of ratings that Nielsen reports. There's the rating itself, which is essentially in a percentage measuring a portion of a given group. This is how you get the demographics. So it's either like households or adults between this age or women between this age watching a specific show. And basically the way that works is they have like a group of 100,000 households, and they basically survey them to say which one did you watch and which ones, and they have your information to get an idea. They have like a sample core group of people that watch shows, and they go off of that. There's also the share, which is the percentage of a given group who are watching TV at that exact time, which means like they're watching it live or they're watching it on DVR, because now there's ratings where it's like, live plus 7 days. So it's the people who are watching it live that first day, and then it's the people who are watching it like on their DVR the 7 days afterwards. Then there's the total viewers, which is obviously the total number of people who are watching a program at any moment when it actually airs. So that means it changes depending on if someone tunes out. They turn it off, and it no longer counts as a viewer. There's the overnight metered market ratings, which is the ones that are released the next morning, which are the ones that they specifically say, okay, these are the ones that people specifically watched last night, but it does include the out-of-home viewing. So it means if someone's not just watching on television, or if they're watching it streaming online, they would count that. There's the Live Plus Same Day, like I said, Live Plus 3 and Live Plus 7. And then there's a variety of other ones. There's also multi-platform ratings, which includes like digital viewing on like Hulu and other third-party services that give rating numbers specifically because they're not the owners of the content, so they have to report the numbers to the companies that are, they're licensing the content from. But the idea is that there's a bunch of different ratings that they go off of, but the way they get their ratings is that they have this like base amount of people that they go off of, and it's the Nielsen ratings are calculated based on a sample of 40,000 homes and about 100,000 people. That's demographically representative to the population as a whole. So that is how they get the number. They seek out these people and they find out what these specific people are watching, and then that's what the ratings are based off of. And they're just like, that's why they always are in like a 7.8, and then they just add the million to it because it's a sampling of what it is. Is it infallible? No, it's not infallible by any means, but it's pretty good about making sure that it's very close to what it is. And this is what broadcast uses to decide whether or not to renew or cancel shows, is based off of these ratings, because it is like the industry standard for broadcast television as well as cable. So when you compare it to something like Netflix, it's not even the same in the sense of Netflix is comparing 2 minutes of viewing or even 70% of the viewing as it was before. They're comparing that to something like an entire episode being watched at any given moment. Sure, the ratings for an entire season could shift back and forth because they air at different times and the popularity of the show could wane, but it's not even close in any sense of the form. Like the idea that you could do 2 minutes and compare that to what Nielsen is doing, where it's sampling a large amount of people and saying, okay, what are you watching? The reality of it is Netflix knows exactly how long people are watching in general. And the reason I have a problem with it is not necessarily because of the 2 minutes thing. It's because this is what they're choosing to go off of instead of them coming up with some sort of, by no means are they obligated to tell everybody the ratings for every single show. We've talked about this before. They're not obligated in any way. But to sit here and tout numbers and say, this is where we're getting these numbers, this is how popular shows are, and somehow those numbers are going to end up getting compared to shows that are nowhere even near the same, like, they're not even like judged or calculated the same way. It's just, it's kind of disingenuous in the sense of how can you sit there and say that a show has had 76 million viewers, but maybe half of them only watched the first 2 minutes and got tired of the show. You have no idea because of the number they're presenting. But when it comes to the media, they're of course going to present, okay, there's 100 million people who have watched this show. Well, holy crap, that's a lot of people. When you look at another show, it doesn't even come close to that. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the part that I have a problem with. It's not so much about the number they chose to focus on, but the fact that because the number is loaded no matter what, it's being compared almost not. It's being compared in a bad way to other shows and other services where other shows are going to be held to some sort of standard that is impossible to be held to.
Yeah, you answered that question. So just one more follow-up before I really get into my piece. Does Nielsen, right, because I think they've evolved with the times, have they developed metrics for the streaming age? Like, so, do they have partnerships potentially with like HBO Max or Hulu? You know what I mean? So have they evolved their business to deal with streaming?
So they have ratings specifically. There's only a couple of services that they include ratings for. So any of the services that have streaming live TV, they have the ability to get numbers for them. So like Hulu or Hulu Live, or you have YouTube TV, or any of these streaming services that offer channels to choose from and content to watch, Nielsen can get those ratings because those are reported directly to the basically the broadcast channels that are licensing those channels to these other services. The only service that has incorporated Nielsen ratings at all at this point would be Amazon Prime Video. They're the only one who has embraced Nielsen and said, we are in fact going to let Nielsen come in and give metrics for our shows. And this just happened recently. It wasn't something that's been happening for quite some time. It happened at the end of October, and Jack Ryan was the first big release that came out that Nielsen had numbers for, and the numbers were great. It wasn't any sort of like question of whether or not the Nielsen didn't work for a streaming service, because they did. I mean, it showed that Jack Ryan was an extremely popular show. It just really comes down to the services have to let Nielsen in to do the numbers and to acknowledge the numbers. And the thing is, at this point, that's not happening.
Yeah, which I think stinks. I think it's unfair. Yeah, so it seems like Nielsen, the way how they're doing their statistics, the classical way, it just reminds me a lot of how they do. It reaches back into a lot of like basic stats that people may have learned in either high school or college. In terms of getting a representative population size of a certain number, you do the statistics, and then you have some interval of confidence, whatever. Basically, like what you're doing, like for polling. Polling, they have all these different polls, but it's like, how many U.S. citizens like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, they don't really get every single person. They just get a representative data set. And they infer that it is going to be for the population, right? It's not close, but it's close enough to really, move the business and stuff. So to me, that makes sense. It's founded on time. Not only is it just more than one set of metrics, right? Because you're discussing multiple different things, but your data isn't just from one source. So you're kind of seeing, a little bit globally of like what is happening among all people. Now, the thing with Netflix that I don't like is the fact of just 2 minutes is an arbitrary number. In programming and math, I learned an interesting saying. It was just like, when you optimize for a metric, you also optimize for a co-metric. Usually in this co-metric is something bad. All right. So if Netflix is the goal is to get viewership numbers, right? And 2 minutes is of the whole entire series. Is 2 minutes of the whole entire series is considered a view?
Yeah,
right. Or
that's right.
Or
yeah.
I thought it was two. That's just dumb. There's no engagement there. It's just it happened to play for 2 minutes. Like what? That doesn't make any sense. Just also, I don't understand why they changed it. Like 70%. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. At least of one episode, or of the movie. Like you checked it out, but you realized you didn't really want to finish it, or you got up to go to the bathroom, and then your kid's yelling at you, and you never got back to it. Like, I consider that a view. Fair, sure. But 2 minutes isn't even representative. You even finished the show. Like, there's so many questions of why and what are they thinking in my head right now that I'm going to end up repeating myself a lot. I can't think of any reason why this new system is going to be logically sound. The order of magnitude just of inflation is just ridiculous. And so I just don't understand. It's one of those like, why? Come on, Netflix. I don't get it.
It really just comes down to
I'm waiting for your rant. I know the listeners are too. I was trying to leave some of the rant for you.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not going to sit here and rant too much about it, but because I've said a lot of it. But what I will say is, ultimately, what does these numbers mean? What do these numbers mean? I don't understand what the intent of this is other than just fluffing the numbers. And that's just what it feels. It's like we're fluffing the numbers. We're explaining how we're going to fluff the numbers so that when you see the numbers in the future, you will always question anything that we give you. Like, I don't understand why this makes any sense. Like, it's one thing to sit there and say, we've got X amount of subscribers. We've got, there's X amount of US subscribers. Internationally, we're growing. The number of US subscribers growth compared to international. All those numbers make perfect sense. And I'm not trying to claim in any way that they're fluffing those numbers, because I'm positive that would actually be illegal if they were doing that. But the viewership numbers, they by all means can choose however they want to showcase these numbers, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the stock is going to go up or down based off of these shows being super successful or not. If they were actually fluffing their numbers, I don't know that they would legally get in trouble for fluffing the viewership numbers of shows individually, because that doesn't mean anything when it comes to the amount of money coming in per subscriber. Subscriber growth and subscriber counts is what actually is reported, and that has to do with directly bringing money in. Now, it's not like the investors or the stockholders have any control over what type of content gets produced for the service. Netflix controls that all themselves. The investors could raise a fuss about something not performing very well, sure, but that doesn't mean that it for fact will be canceled or reproduced if somebody some big investor screams out and says, I want this produced. That's not how a media company works. So them fluffing their numbers for viewership, there's nothing that it can actually do other than just make them look bigger than they really are when it comes to the larger media landscape. But the numbers that are only going to matter when it comes to the stock market and things like that are the subscriber counts, are the growth numbers and things like that. That's what everybody cares about. Nobody's predicting how many viewers watched The Witcher prior to them releasing their quarterly earnings, and then it underperforms and then the stock drops. Media shows don't make a stock drop, or it's not that. It's the reported money that is what controls the stock. So, for example, a big studio like Walt Disney, they put out Star Wars. Let's see, it completely flops. They spent a ton of money. It completely flops. Or here's a better example that actually happened. Universal, they put out the movie Cats in December. That was their big film, and they completely flopped, and that movie did horrible. And when they reported their numbers for the last quarter of 2019, they stated not that one film screwed their film division, but they said that they had a number of different issues within their film division that caused issues, even though most people on the outside could easily say, well, it's probably the fact that Cats completely flopped. And that's why they did so poorly, because they expected that movie to do really well. That's the thing. There's no controllable sense of, from the investor standpoint of how they're creating content. Sure, you create enough crappy content, people might leave, but that doesn't, one project as far as a media company goes, doesn't completely end a media company. That's not how it is. So like, the whole point of me saying this is Netflix, they're fluffing the viewer numbers. That would be like the equivalent of a studio coming out on Sunday and saying their studio estimates for the film are this. Let's say they say $100 million they made 100 million over the weekend, and then the actuals come in because there's actual numbers that get reported, and the actuals come in at 90 million. Well, the studio doesn't get in trouble because they said 100 million. The number that matters is the actual number that actually is reported. So Netflix, in a sense, they can't get in trouble for fluffing their viewership numbers because it ultimately doesn't do anything as far as subscribers. Now, I will say that you could sit there and make the connection of, okay, well, The Witcher was viewed by 80 million people, and the other 80 million people who have not watched The Witcher, that is, that makes up Netflix's total subscriber base, they could see that number and be like, wow, what am I missing out on? Maybe I need to go check that out. But again, or it could imply that, people who are not subscribed to the service go check it out. But that just feels like marketing then, and it's not necessarily trying to, dupe the stock market.
See, I view it in a slightly different way. Like, yes, I think you can make an argument that it's not, quote unquote, not illegal, to do so. But one of my favorite economists is Dino Kahneman, and he dealt with behavior economics. Essentially, at the end of the day, is that we can't look at economics and markets in a totally rational way. People are irrational, and you have to, as best as you can, factor that into your analysis of the subject. Once again, not a behavioral economist. I just read, and so that's kind of the basic premise of it. And so I can see where, in terms of like in the market, there's something called consumer confidence, right? Especially in the United States, people will do surveys, and it's like, well, how confident are U.S. consumers these days in terms of buying stuff, and how do we feel about the economy? And it's very interesting how much of like how we view like the U.S. economy really affects the growth of the U.S. economy. Like by metrics, right, by itself, it might be doing fine, but if we hear a story in the news saying like the economy's bad, it's like, well, since our perception of it has now changed, it's going to change the way how we interact with our money, and we might, not spend our money. We might just, take it out of the bank or something crazy like that. So in that line of thinking, that's where I'm going is, yeah, it's going to affect like streamer confidence or, stakeholder confidence. Hopefully stakeholders should have a little bit more common sense and just look at the cold hard facts. But, once again, people are people, and we all make mistakes, and they might, be like, I have this feeling about Netflix. I've been hearing on the news, like The Witcher's been doing great, There's a new TV show, You's been doing great, blah, blah, blah. It's, Stranger Things season 4 is going to come out. That's going to be great. You're going to have overconfidence in Netflix, but you might not be actually taking into account who, like, all the projects that have flopped or all the money that they've wasted. And, like, once again, if you're a decent, analyst, you would have taken account for these things. But there are people who are going to sit there, stockholders are going to be like, yeah, this is great. People who don't really put in the time, executives are going to be like, yeah, this is great. Like, here are the numbers, how good we are, people on the news going to report about how great Netflix is, and that's going to drive up the stock too. It's like, yeah, Netflix is great because of all these numbers. And people on different shows going to say that, yeah, Netflix is the king and blah, 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 but they're not going to really report on the whole entire story. And you got to take to that account too of how will this be perceived by people?
The only number that they actually gave a jump to was there was a documentary called Our Planet, and from the old number, it was 33 million, and it jumped up to 45 million. So, I mean, it's a huge increase.
Yeah, so that type of jump is, it's like, oh, wow, that's just inflated, in my opinion. You're inflating confidence, and that can or cannot, backfire against you. Like right now, it's going to be great because it's going to make Netflix look really good, but, we're now going to have an overconfidence in Netflix to deliver. And what if they don't deliver next time? Like, what if the next set of shows aren't so good? What if, there's just a bunch of what ifs that can happen that can affect, people outside their perspective of the company, and that's going to drive the stock price down. So it's like there's a lot of behaviors at play, a lot of psychology at play that's kind of ridiculous. But once again, people are irrational, and I can see that. And it's not bad, just the way how we are. And I can see how choosing a 2-minute metric like this, and essentially now going to inflate all these different numbers, is going to make Netflix look really, really good to a lot of people. And that just concerns me because it's like, well, are we really valuing Netflix at what they really are? Like, are we overvaluing Netflix and their brand? And I feel like this new metric can do that. Like, I'm happy for The Witcher, but I can't trust that The Witcher is actually as popular as they say they are. Like Disney Plus, I trust the way how they said their metric. We don't know the full details, but that one made more sense to me. Like the other metrics out there make more sense to me. Now, are they necessarily 100% accurate? No, not necessarily. Not really ever. But I have more confidence in that reporting that's going to reflect a great amount of the population than just somebody watching 2 minutes of just one segment of the whole entire series. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that view, that's how I can see how this might affect, Netflix in a financial way where there could be potentially some, liability. Once again, I'm just a software engineer. I'm just speculating. We're not lawyers. We're not, analysts. Thank goodness we're not at the SEC. But in my head, I would be pissed off as an investor.
It just comes down to don't believe the viewership numbers and somehow take that into some sort of idea of buying stock. I'm not a stock advisor. I'm not trying to give you any stock tips, but don't take those viewership numbers and decide whether or not to purchase stock. That would be a really, really bad idea. I'm just saying that as like a common sense public service announcement is don't take viewership numbers as a reason to buy stock in a company, because I don't think that is a good idea. And I'm going to say this thing to kind of wrap up this conversation, which is there has to be something to change. The only way it's going to change is if the investors start raising a fuss about the fact that their viewership numbers have to change. And there has been a lot of the one thing that I will give the media credit to about this new change that Netflix put out with their quarterly earnings is that everybody is on the same page as this is ridiculous, and these numbers that they're trying to fluff should not be happening. Everyone is saying this. So we could end up seeing this change back to the way it was, which would make way more sense. But we'll have to wait and see, because it's not going to happen overnight. But I imagine the fallout from the pushback of this happening is not going to be something that Netflix can just ignore. So just keep that in mind. All right, so with that being said, we're going to wrap up this episode. We obviously didn't have a lot to talk about other than this Netflix number thing. We are planning on having, in 2 weeks, we're planning on having maybe a break. We were thinking about doing some topics. We haven't figured it out, but we might just take the week off due to the lack of news that we have. We'll have to see what happens and save some of our discussion points or topics to discuss when we have these shorter episodes. But just be on the lookout. We do have a content episode, and we'll have episodes coming out next week as well. But we also haven't gotten any topics emailed to us either of things you guys like us to cover. So I'm not saying we won't, but if you do want us to have episodes released in 2 weeks, we do need topics, and we will need those very soon. So send your topics over to thestreamingwars@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter and join our Discord for all these articles that we talk about here on the podcast and some that we don't. Follow us on Instagram for all these announcements related to the latest episodes releasing. You can head over to the site, thestreamingwars.io/streaming, to check out our streaming calendar of all the content that is coming to streaming services. And finally, wherever you are listening to this podcast, a review is greatly appreciated, or you can just send us feedback directly to our email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com. For Tony and myself, this has been The Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.